We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, when did the Prime Minister first become aware of the planned mass casualty terror attack against Sydney's Jewish community?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for his question, and I've said that the government has two priorities. The first is keeping Australians safe. The second is making sure that the ongoing investigation, which is ongoing, prioritises not just capturing those people who have been involved, and there are, of course, at least two people who are in custody publicly, but in order to ascertain who is behind this, it is absolutely critical that the AFP, that the state police agencies, the ASIO and the intelligence agencies be allowed to do their work, and the federal government will provide every support for them.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. What work has the Albanese Labor government done to strengthen healthcare in Australia after a decade of cuts to Medicare? Are there any other approaches to healthcare that would leave Australians worse off?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Gilmore for her question. Indeed, my government is building Australia's future by strengthening Medicare, by prioritising support for people to get the health care they need, when they need it, where they need it, and just needing their Medicare card in order to get it. That's our priority, and government is about making decisions about priorities of expenditure. And that's why $1.7 billion of additional funding for public hospitals just in the next year will make an enormous difference. That's our priority, not long lunches, helping people with the health care they need. This funding will help to cut waiting lists. It will reduce waiting times in emergency rooms, and it will manage ramping. This will save lives. And all of the states and territories that we've engaged with over recent days have welcomed this announcement, and I congratulate the Health Minister on the work that he has done to deliver this. This is just part of our plan. Better support for our public hospitals, but also support for primary health care so that the pressure is taken off those emergency departments. That's why the tripling of the bulk billing incentive was so important. That's why 87 Medicare urgent care clinics providing the care that people need for free to over 1 million Australians who have visited those urgent care clinics when they've needed it, 1/3 of whom are under the age of 15, and they're right across the board. These haven't got a colour-coded spreadsheet to decide where they are. What they have been provided is in regional Australia, in our suburbs, in our towns, right throughout the entire country. That has delivered. That has delivered over 1 million free doctors' appointments. Now, this new agreement increases the Commonwealth contribution to state-run hospitals over the next year by 12% to a record almost $34 billion. That stands in stark contrast. I'm asked about alternatives. The last time the coalition got into government, they tried to rip $50 billion from public hospitals. They wanted a GP tax every time people visited a doctor, and they wanted a payment to be made when people visited the emergency department of public hospitals as well. Well, on Sunday, the Leader of the Opposition made clear that the cuts are coming. He won't tell you where they're coming till after the election, but we know that he's had health in his sights before, and we know it will be in his sights again.
Give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. When was the Prime Minister first informed of the planned mass casualty terror attack against Sydney's Jewish community?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. I refer to my previous answer. I note the characterisation of the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I'm happy to provide a brief through the security agencies if requested by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
The member for Bowman.
The Leader of the Opposition hasn't got one, but we're happy to provide that. And then the Shadow Minister might be better informed. The priority here is not the playing of political games.
Prime Minister will pause. The member for Bendigo will cease interjecting. The manager on a point of order.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The Prime Minister is studiously avoiding answering the question. If he doesn't want to be relevant to the question, he can sit down.
Yeah, we're just going to deal with this issue. We're going to deal with this issue of relevance just really quickly. The Prime Minister, I think anyone was listening would understand that. I know the Deputy would like a date, a time. I just want to bring her to the page of practice of 567 about the interpretation of relevance, which has been, by all speakers, very wide. Now, this was a short question. It was a specific question. But the Standing Orders provides the Prime Minister to speak on the policy topic. If he was to start talking about, for example, climate change or another topic, I would bring him back to order. But when he is giving specific information and advice, and I know it's not the answer that you want, but I do not have the powers under the Standing Order to direct the Prime Minister to give you the answer you wish. On a point of order,
Mr Speaker, thank you for your advice to the chamber. I think it's an important point you make.
The Attorney-General is warned.
Mr Speaker, if your interpretation of the Standing Orders, as you say, is to be applied, and I respect the judgment that you've given to the chamber, if the Prime Minister cannot be directed to provide the date, which is what we're seeking in relation to this matter, is it in order for the Prime Minister then to try and sway to stray into other areas, even in relation to the same issue? So when he goes beyond giving the date, which is what we've asked, you say that they can't be done. We take your advice in relation to that. How is it possible for him then to be broad-ranging, even on this topic, without you bringing him into line?
The member is correct. He can't stray into other topic areas. But as the Prime Minister was speaking when the manager took the point of order, he was talking about security agencies, a briefing and involvement around the issue. So that, under the Standing Orders, makes his answer directly relevant. So, as I said before you interrupted me, if there was another topic that he was entering into, cost of living, for example, you can get my assurance that I will make sure the Prime Minister is being directly relevant. But on any objective ruling for any previous speaker, he's talking about the topic, and under the Standing Orders, as long as he is remaining directly relevant to the topic, he's in order. The Prime Minister has the call. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition, was treated with respect when I dealt with his question. I'm asking him to show the same respect to everyone else in the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, he's only happy when he's angry.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
Mr Speaker,
Give us a smile,
Mr Speaker,
Give us the annual smile.
the response
The Minister for Climate Change is warned.
An objection from the Manager of Opposition Business was to offer a briefing. I wouldn't have thought that that was provocative. I would have thought that on this issue, it's pretty handy to find out the facts. It's pretty handy to get a response, because the issue here, you know what the Australian people want to know? They want to know who's behind this. They want to know who is engaged in anti-Semitic attacks. They want to know who, if people have been paid, they want to know where that trail leads. And they want intelligence agencies to be able to do that work without political interference and without political games. That is what they want here, but the priority of those opposite is to play political games.
Order.
I met with...
Order. Members on my left.
And I engage regularly with leaders in the Jewish community, and what they are interested in is keeping their community safe. And you know what? That's what my priority is too. And the way that you keep them safe is by having confidence in our national security agencies, making sure that they can engage in the sort of intelligence. If you look at the people who have been in custody, if you then look for what is behind that, and surely the idea that that's where it stops is, quite frankly, not the case. And the police have continued to be responsible for what is made public, and I will leave them to do their job. And you know what? I'll back them doing it, unlike those opposite who just want to play politics.
Order. Before I call the member for Lingiari, the member for Fadden has interjected 8 times in 2 questions. He'll leave the chamber under 94A. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Minister, how will the Albanese Labor government's new health funding agreements with all states and territories help to protect our public hospital system, strengthen Medicare and build Australia's future? And, Minister, are there approaches that will leave Australians worse off?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thanks, Speaker. And I thank the member for Lingiari not just for her question but for organising our visit to the Alice Springs Hospital in December, where I had the pleasure of meeting the extraordinary team that works in the emergency department there, one of the outstanding EDs that I've visited in my time. The Alice is one of 700 public hospitals in Australia that employs about 500,000 hard-working doctors, nurses, health professionals and support staff. And for 41 years, because Saturday was the 41st birthday of Medicare, for 41 years a core Medicare principle has been the assurance that every Australian can access high-quality care in a public hospital completely free of charge. You simply can't have a strong Medicare without strong public hospitals. Now, we have a terrific public hospital system in Australia, staffed by probably the best-trained health workforce on the planet. But the truth is, Mr Speaker, it's a system under very serious pressure. We're getting older as a population, we have more complex chronic disease, we have a serious legacy from the COVID pandemic, and frankly, more broadly in the healthcare system, we're dealing with a decade of cuts from those opposite when they were in government. The existing public hospital funding arrangements simply are not fit for purpose. That's why we've been investing in urgent care clinics. That's why we've invested in state government initiatives to move longer stay older patients out of the hospital system. But in terms of public hospital funding, wage and activity pressure for hospitals means that right now the Commonwealth share of hospital budgets is declining. It's going to fall well below 40% if we don't do something. Well, we are determined to be a reliable partner, and that's why the Prime Minister today announced a $1.7 billion additional funding commitment by this government for the next financial year for every state and territory, and that we would keep negotiating a longer-term 5-year funding agreement with them. This will be especially good for the NT, because for over a decade the NT has been chronically underfunded by the Commonwealth, and this government will be the first government determined to fix that. The NT's funding from the Commonwealth will increase next year by 30%, and the member for Solomon and the member for Lingiari have been arguing strongly for that for some considerable time. But I'm asked whether there are any approaches that would leave Australians worse off. Well, perhaps the approach of the Leader of the Opposition when he was Health Minister might be instructive, because although he promised there'd be no cuts to health in 2013, in 2014 he tried to rip $50 billion out of our public hospital system. His approach this year is a little different. He admits there will be cuts. He just won't tell people what they'll be. Well, we know what they'll be, because this man favours long lunches over public hospitals, and he needs to find $600 billion for nuclear power stations. He'll come after Medicare again, you can be sure of that.
Before I call the member for Indi, I'll just do a few acknowledgements in the gallery today. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are local council representatives. We have Mayor Christina Holmdal and CEO Kristen Desmond from the West Tamar Council and the member for Bass's electorate, Mayor Ben Blaine from the Warrnambool City Council and the member for Wannan's electorate, and Mayor Albert Jacob together with Councillor Philip Vinchulo from the City of Joondalup in the electorate of Moore. I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are representatives from Eating Disorders Families Australia, led by Jane Rowan, and joined by former Australian of the Year, Taran Brumpet. They are at Parliament House today to launch their Nourish, Nurture and Notice program. Welcome to you all. The call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. Before the 3G shutdown, regional communities in my electorate were told that no one would be worse off. But since the final shutdown, my constituents have experienced worse connectivity, completely losing the ability to make calls in some areas, and have been told to spend their own money on aftermarket antennas. Does the minister recognise that some people are worse off after the 3G shutdown, and what will the government do to fix it?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Indi for her question, and I know how seriously she takes these issues of connectivity in her community. I also want to take the opportunity, Mr Speaker, to extend my appreciation to members across the chamber, particularly in regional areas right across the aisle, who prior to the 3G switchover assisted in disseminating important information about that to their local communities, which is very important. Just for context, Mr Speaker, the spectrum is what we call a scarce resource. It's used but not consumed, it's valuable, it can be redeployed in other ways, and from the evolution of the various forms of mobile technology, from CDMA to 2G and now the 3G network being switched over, it enables the refarming of that spectrum to ensure that it's capable of doing more, so actually delivering technical benefits. But you are very right that those technical benefits won't be realised if people don't actually have coverage under that new technology. This was also the first switchover to occur during what we call the Internet of Things, where there's so many connected devices and so many people are reliant on it. So I completely acknowledge the member's concern. It is very real, and on the 17th of December I convened industry, regulators, the mobile carriers, consumer groups to look at the lessons learnt from this 3G switchover, and I can give her some insights into what we're doing following that. So the government has stressed to the carriers that the benefits of the 3G switchover really need to be demonstrated. And whilst it is a fact of physics that the switchover is completed, there needs to be a focus now on the consumer welfare. And the member is right. It is very true that there are multiple complaints from customers, particularly in regional areas, who have seen fortuitous coverage diminish and who have seen their services overall being challenged. The question is, how can that be improved? So I'm happy to inform the member that whilst obviously it is concerning to hear those reports happening in regional areas, I am monitoring this very closely. I've made it clear to service providers the expectation that the 3G switchover will deliver on these benefits. The ACMA and the ACCC have both been highlighted in this, not only in terms of the technical requirements, but also the representations that have been made to customers about coverage pre- and post-switchover, because as many consumers will know, those coverage maps don't always match what they actually receive. I'll take this opportunity too to highlight that Telstra has now established a dedicated 3G helpline. The number is 1800 990 853. And I have formally requested weekly reports from the carriers so I can continue to monitor this. I encourage members, if they do have particular concerns, my door is open. I'll be happy to meet with the member after this. We can go through that, but that's open to all members in this place, Mr Speaker.
The call to the honourable member for Reid.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping Australians with cost of living? what approaches would leave people worse off?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker. The member for Reid's terrific, and that's a really important question. And when that side of the House is focused on long lunches and cuts and conflict and culture wars, this side of the House has maintained a focus on the cost of living. And because of that focus, inflation is down, wages are up and unemployment is low. We've delivered 2 surpluses and we're rolling out cost of living help. And we're making substantial and now sustained progress in the fight against inflation, but we know that people are still under pressure, and that's why there is still more to do. Now, we also know that the same Australians would be thousands of dollars worse off today if the opposition leader had his way on the tax cuts, on wages, on energy rebates and on cost of living help. And we also know they'd be worse off still if he wins the election and goes after Medicare again, goes after wages again and pushes up electricity prices with his nuclear madness. And that's why there were 2 revelations in the last few days which were very, very important. The first one is that the long lunches policy would cost Australian workers more than $10 billion a year to subsidise long lunches and entertainment if every business claimed what they were entitled to.
Order.
He wants lower wages for workers and longer lunches for bosses, and he wants taxpayers to foot the bill. Now, the second revelation is that he's got big cuts in mind, but he won't tell Australians what they are until after the election. We know that from the Insider's interview. Now, his secret cuts and his warped priorities should send a shiver up the spine of every worker, of every student, every family, every pensioner.
Treasurer will pause. The member for Moreton is warned. The manager on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Point of order's relevance. You've previously ruled that even with questions that do invite a compare and contrast, that it can't be the entire answer. And I think the Treasurer spent about 15 or 20 seconds on the first part and presumably is going to spend the balance of the question speaking about the opposition. That cannot be directly relevant to the question, even with that invitation to compare and contrast based on your previous rulings.
Order. The Leader of the House on the point of order.
Mr Speaker, there is no standing order and no section of practice that refers to dividing a question into fractions and then applying a proportion of the 3 minutes to how much in each section. This question goes specifically to what approaches would leave people worse off. There is no way the Treasurer is being anything other than relevant to that question.
Yeah. Order. Order on the point. Order. The Minister for Education is warned. The manager on a further point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance, and the question does have to be directly relevant. And previous speakers, not just yourself, have ruled that in doing so, an invitation to compare and contrast is not free rein to spend the entire answer on the contrast. Now, that is the practice that has been adopted by previous speakers.
Order. 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 The Leader of the House. We'll do this orderly and we'll do it respectfully. The Leader of the House.
The compare and contrast rule, which has often been referred to as previous speakers as it's there, is when there is not a specific alternative approach as part of the question, that there's still a right to be able to compare and contrast, but it's viewed as being very restricted in those circumstances.
You're both right. Which will make me unpopular with everyone. Under the standing orders, the Treasurer is being directly relevant, but you can't have a question simply asked about the opposition. So the manager is correct. To talk about the approaches, he's got to talk about what the government is doing as well. So I'm just going to make sure for the remainder of his answer, if he is doing approaches about what would leave Australians worse, he's got to explain that in the context of the government policy as well. Order. Order. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. That's why I began by saying under this government inflation's down, wages are up and unemployment is low. And that's been deliberate. And there is an alternative over there, Mr Speaker. And those opposite think there's $315 billion in cuts right for the picking in the budget. And Australians should know that that $350 billion includes pension indexation, natural disaster funding, hospitals and bulk billing, housing, TAFE and support for veterans. Now, they are coming after all of that, Mr Speaker, but they'll tell you about it later. They won't come clean on costs or cuts, and that puts every Australian at risk. Now, Mr Speaker, another reason why this matters and the contrast is so important is he needs to find $600 billion for this nuclear insanity. He's got to find it somewhere, and last time he went after Medicare, Mr Speaker. So a stark choice at the election this year. A coalition of cuts and conflict and culture wars, making Australians worse off and taking the country backwards, or this Prime Minister and this Labor government getting inflation down, helping with the cost of living and building Australia's future.
I didn't want to interrupt during the Treasurer, but I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
During that answer, the member for Hume made an unparliamentary remark and he should withdraw.
We'll just get the member for Hume to quickly withdraw. I withdraw. I thank the member for Hume and we'll move to the next question. Yeah. The member for Robertson. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Premier Minns was open and honest with the people of New South Wales when he briefed and provided confidence to the public in declaring what date he'd been advised of the planned terrorist attack by this unknown organisation or people or individuals. The Prime Minister has been embarrassed because he wasn't advised by the police because they were worried about him leaking the information ahead of any action by the police. Mr Speaker,
members on my...
I'm asking my question.
Yeah, members on my right.
I'm asking my question, Mr Speaker.
But reflecting directly on a member, as we discussed late yesterday in question time.
It's not a reflection, Mr Speaker, it's a fact. Let the Prime Minister dispute it. Let the Prime Minister dispute it.
All right.
Let him dispute it. I'm stating a fact.
Just whilst we're dealing with this, resume your seat. The Leader of the House is risen on a point of order during a question, but it's an important point that I want to hear from.
Mr Speaker, that reflection that was contained within the question cannot under standing orders be part of the question. And either if the Leader of the Opposition insists on saying it, then the whole question should be ruled out of order, or he should simply frame the question without the part that's disorderly.
Yeah, on the point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on the point of order, if the Prime Minister claims still being misrepresented, there are avenues for him at the end of question time to make that point. And the statement I've made is a statement of fact, Mr Speaker. It's a statement of fact and it's the reason the Prime Minister keeps digging. So look, I'm happy to...
Yeah, look, I think to get through this, just as we dealt with yesterday in the last part of question time, where the Leader of the Opposition took offence at the reflection that was directed towards him, to assist the House, to assist question time so we don't get bogged down, I'm just going to ask the Leader to rephrase that part of the question so that we can deal with this and he can have the right to ask his question.
Happy to assist, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Premier Minns was open and honest and transparent with the people of New South Wales when he declared that on the 20th of January he was advised by New South Wales Police about the planned terrorist attack. The Prime Minister has been asked on multiple occasions to be honest, open and straightforward with the Australian public as to why he wasn't notified. The Prime Minister has previously advised dates on which he's been notified of serious events by the Australian Federal Police. Why can't the Prime Minister just be honest with the Australian people?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There have been instances of people releasing or referencing classified material in the past, and indeed there was a rebuke by Senator James Paterson of the Leader of the Opposition for him referencing classified information in this parliament.
The question contained a range of issues about— No, the manager, just resume your seat. I'm not taking the point of order. Resume your seat. We're not having this. The Prime Minister was asked a question about former issues. It was a broad question. It wasn't about the one specific issue. Other material was in the question. There was a long preamble. I'm not taking points of order because you don't like the answer. Order. Members on my right. I don't need commentary. Questions within order. We dealt with the imputation. The Prime Minister is giving information to the House about the other issues that he was asked about in the question. It's different from the one that was specific about this issue. There was other issues and content in the question. He is being directly relevant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition, to quote him, referred prior to the last election, when he was a Cabinet Minister, with access to information, he referred to both open source and other intelligence IC. He referred to that and he was rebuked by Senator Patterson as chair of the PJCIS. Also, that was in 2022. But it's not the first time, because in 2020, the Office of Home, to quote an article, the Office of Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton was suspected of leaking information it was told was classified about the cost of medically evacuating refugees.
Order. Yep. We're 1 minute 30 in, so I'll hear from the manager.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The point of order is relevance, and out of respect to you and your comments, I refrained from speaking earlier and listened further to the answer from the Prime Minister. There is absolutely no way that the Prime Minister's comments now can in any way be relevant to this question. We are asking questions that the Australian people want answers to, that Premier Minns has provided publicly, and the Prime Minister, if he doesn't want to answer, should sit down.
Well, the Prime Minister is being relevant because it was a broader question, but he's going to have to come back to the substance of the question he was asked about, and I'm going to draw him back to the question. Here's the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. There are two choices you can make here. One is to prioritise getting to the bottom of what is happening here, supporting the police and intelligence agencies, or you can choose to play politics and play these games. And that is precisely what you are doing. No asking for a briefing of the security agencies. When I offer a briefing of the security agencies to others, no taking up of that, indeed an objection through a point of order to that as well. AFP, Operation Avalite, have successfully made one arrest. They have joint counter-terrorism teams operating. There have been 180 arrests in New South Wales. 12 people have been charged in Queensland, 13 in South Australia, and today 2 in Western Australia. That is the hard work that is being conducted by our police and security and intelligence services. The idea that that is not the priority and that should be not my focus is, quite frankly, absurd. Absurd and irresponsible. And there are others on that side who know how irresponsible it is.
Concluded. Call to the honourable member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief for families accessing early childhood education? Is there anything that could put this at risk and leave families worse off?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education, the Minister for Youth and the Minister assisting the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Robertson for their question. The member for Robertson understands, as do we on this side of the House, that when we talk about early childhood education and care, we're talking about an essential service, a service that families rely on to study, to work, to pay the household bills. And that's why the Albanese Labor government is undertaking reform of the sector based on 3 key pillars: affordable early learning, a strong early childhood education and care workforce, and a system that's accessible. Now, so far, our reforms have delivered real cost of living relief for Australian families. In fact, more than 1 million families have benefited from our cheaper childcare reforms, a commitment that we made before we came into government. A family earning $120,000 a year, accessing 30 hours of early learning a week, has saved around $2,768 since September 2023. But, Mr Speaker, we know that there is more to do. And today I introduce the Early Childhood Education and Care 3-Day Guarantee Bill. This bill will guarantee families at least 72 hours of subsidised early learning a fortnight. And for First Nations families, this increases to 100 hours of subsidised early learning a fortnight. Our guarantee replaces the Liberals' activity test, which locked out families and did nothing to increase workforce participation. Because, Mr Speaker, only an Albanese Labor government understands that quality early learning provides the opportunity to improve a child's lifelong trajectory.
Member for Moncrieff.
And we believe that there should be no barriers to opportunity. The 3-day guarantee will mean real cost of living relief for over 66,000 families, saving them an average of around $1,370 per year, and about half of those families earn less than $100,000. Lower income families get to save even more, an average of around $1,460 a year. It also means that over 100,000 families can get more subsidised hours of early childhood education and care if they want or need it. This bill will help parents get back into the workforce and give meaningful support to families struggling with the cost of living. But, Mr Speaker, I am asked about risks, and the risks are right there on the coalition benches. The Leader of the Opposition has confirmed he's going to make huge cuts. But Australians won't know what those cuts are until after the election. We're taking action to deliver cost of living relief for families. The Leader of the Opposition wants to gift his business mates.
Call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister be honest with the Australian people and advise why he didn't receive a briefing for at least 7 days after the New South Wales Premier had been advised of the alleged planned terrorist attack in New South Wales?
Call to the Prime Minister.
There are a range of assertions in that question that the Leader of the Opposition chooses to raise, because that's the point, just to play politics, not to try to find and hunt down the perpetrators, not to make sure that the perpetrators are held to account, not to find out who is behind the front people, not to discuss or get a briefing of intelligence. Well, I stand with the AFP and ASIO and the ASD and all those who are working so hard to hold these people to account and to ensure that those, either perpetrators themselves or behind anti-Semitic attacks, are held to account, arrested, charged and put in the clink. That is my priority. The opposition leader is showing what his priority is here today, and it is all wrong.
Call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to expand access to early education and care in the outer suburbs and regional Australia? What has been the response, and are there other approaches to spending taxpayers' money that would leave Australians worse off?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the cracking member for Corangamite, for her question.
Mr Speaker, under the Liberals, the cost of childcare went through the roof. It skyrocketed by 49%.
Member for Moncrieff.
And we said when we were elected, Mr Speaker, that we would cut the cost of childcare, and that's what we've done. We've cut the cost of childcare for more than 1 million Australian families. For the average family, they've saved more than $2,000 in the last 12 months. And this year we'll help more kids who are currently missing out, because this year we'll roll out a $1 billion fund to build more childcare centres where they're needed, in the suburbs, in the regions and in the bush. And that got the backing this week of the National Farmers Federation. They said yesterday, and I quote, "We implore the coalition to match Labor's $1 billion Building Early Education Fund to build more than 160 new childcare centres." So the farmers get it, but the Nationals and the Liberals don't. They spent 2.5 years in this joint talking about childcare deserts. They spent a decade in government doing nothing about it, and now there's a $1 billion fund on the table, and they're turning their back on the bush again. Instead, they've come up with something else they want to spend the money on. Instead of building childcare centres in the bush, they want to fund long lunches for inner-city bosses. That's what they want to do. Forget kids in the childcare deserts. They want to fund long lunches and bosses' desserts. Not just that. As the minister just mentioned, they're also opposed to the legislation that she introduced this morning that guarantees 3 days a week of early education to prepare Aussie children for school. Why? Well, the Shadow Minister, the Shadow Treasurer, told us why. He said Australia can't afford that. But apparently Australia can afford at least $1.6 billion a year for every boss to go out to lunch. That's the choice. That's the choice. That's the choice. Escargot for CEOs or early education for our kids. Helping our kids get a great start in life, or helping bosses get a great starter at half price. And I think I know which one parents are going to pick. They're going to pick their kids. They're going to pick education, not this cockamamie long lunch idea from a bunch of Scott Morrison leftovers. This doesn't belong in a budget. It belongs in the bin.
Call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. When was the Prime Minister first informed of the planned mass casualty terror attack against Sydney's Jewish community?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. As I said before, it sounds pretty similar to previous questions. As I've said, you can be for the Australian Federal Police, ASIO and our security intelligence agencies in keeping people safe, or you can be for playing politics.
Give the call to the order. Give the call. Has the Prime Minister concluded his order? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? We'll take the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Where?
Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition is on his feet. He's going to be heard in silence. He's entitled to raise a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, this is the tightest of questions, and I seek your ruling as to whether or not the Prime Minister is relevant to the question asked.
The clock has indicated that the Prime Minister has been speaking for about 17 seconds. So I heard, because there was quite a lot of interjections, I heard the AFP, ASD, they were the only key takeaways I heard so far. So I would have to say he's being directly relevant, because I don't know if he's going to release the date that you wish to. So one point of order has been taken within 17 seconds of this question. So it'll be very hard for someone to get up and say, is the Prime Minister being relevant? Because we've executed that. So I'm just going to assist the House, ask the Prime Minister to be directly relevant for the remainder of his 2 minutes and 42 seconds.
I was asked a question about the police and agencies, and I was speaking about the police and agencies, because I'm for them. And we on this side are for them. Simple as that.
Order.
We have confidence in them to do their work, and we will back them in doing their job. That is what we will do. Continuing to engage, information that is made public, they make decisions about. For example, on the day of the Maroubra childcare incident, the AFP made it clear that it was their view that people were being paid to engage in some of this anti-Semitic actions. If people are being paid who are criminals, maybe it's a good idea to use intelligence to find out who's paying them. Maybe that's the priority, not this political game playing. But those opposite, on a day in which we've announced $1.7 billion of additional health funding, they of course can't ask any questions about health. They can't ask any questions about education or TAFE on a day in which the parliament has passed free TAFE. They can't ask any questions about cost of living, even though they say that's the #1 priority, because the only policy they have is free lunches. Free lunches. So that's why they're reduced to criticising and undermining the work of our police and our security agencies.
The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. Order. Order. The member for Casey and the Prime Minister will cease interjecting. Order. The member for Canning is warned. The member for Paterson has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. What steps has the Albanese Labor government taken to reduce the cost of training and ensure Australians can get the skills they want and need for the jobs they want and need? And are there any proposals for skills and training that would leave Australians worse off, Minister?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Paterson, who is not only a champion of regional New South Wales, she's a champion for free TAFE. Yeah. She celebrates the fact that free TAFE has delivered enrolments for nearly 600,000 Australians. She knows that we are removing financial barriers to TAFE as part of our action on cost of living, to get inflation down, wages up and to create new jobs. She knows that this is making a difference. And we've heard this through the free TAFE Senate inquiry, through dozens of submissions which have highlighted the positive impact of free TAFE. TAFE directors of Australia have shared the story of Bradley Edwards. Now, Bradley's a young father who studied for a Cert 3 in early childhood education and care at TAFE SA. Bradley says this: "Free TAFE has helped me by allowing me to study and pursue this career without the concern of whether or not I can even afford to study and change careers years after leaving high school." And we also know, and the member for Paterson knows this very well, that more than a third of all the enrolments in free TAFE have been in regional and rural areas. And that's why the Central Queensland University submission goes on to say, regional students face the extra costs of time, transport, distance, childcare, time away from work and other expenses. In such circumstances, education often becomes a discretionary expense. Free TAFE has helped to alleviate this burden, enabling students to pursue their studies without having to choose between education and financial stability. So let's look at how much students save. A student like Bradley, studying a Cert 3 in ECEC in South Australia, could save around $4,400. In the NT, a student doing a Cert 3 in community services, around $8,800. Real savings for people getting skills that they want in areas we need. But of course, Speaker, there is more to do to support Australians, and that's why we are making free TAFE permanent. But the Liberals continue to call it wasteful spending. The Leader of the Opposition says he's going to cut wasteful spending.
Order.
And last time they were in government, the coalition left Australians with the second worst skills shortage in the OECD. They cut $3 billion from TAFE and training. They failed to land a national skills agreement with the states and territories in nearly a decade, and they haven't changed. Before they all voted against the bill today, the Deputy Opposition Leader said it's a key principle and tenet of the Liberal Party that if you don't pay for something, you don't value it. And we know it's not just free TAFE they don't value, all public education, Medicare, the NDIS and public hospitals. But Australians value all of these, and they know they'll be worse off under the Liberal Party and a government led by this Leader of the Opposition.
Call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. A question to the Minister for Communications. Gambling reform is unfinished business in this parliament, and parents are angry that their kids are bombarded with gambling ads online and when they watch sports and other shows. After 3 years, your government has still refused to ban gambling ads, so will you at least accept the Greens' compromise offer to ban gambling ads online that target our kids and during sport when families are watching?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question, which goes to a number of matters, including gambling advertising, including the issue of time, and, as I see it, and as I've seen reported from her colleague Senator Hanson-Young, including questions around the interests of the community and the interests of members of parliament. I think it's important to firstly point out, considering it's so contemporaneous, Mr Speaker, that Senator Hanson-Young was out there today basically talking about, about prioritising, this is what she accuses, prioritising the interests of the community over the interests of the gambling lobby and those making money off this parasitic and dangerous industry. And I find it interesting that the honourable member, who's a member of the Greens political party from Queensland, should ask this, when the Queensland Greens have accepted over nearly $500,000 in donations from a high-rolling gambler, despite pushing for a ban on political donations from the gambling industry. What's even more interesting about this, Mr Speaker, is, you know, the honourable member is one of 3 members from Queensland who has benefited from this, and we have the spokesperson for the Greens saying our campaigns are entirely funded by people who believe in our vision and platform, So, of course, in the seats of Brisbane, Griffith and Ryan, constituents in those electorates should be well aware of where that money is coming from to fund the honourable member's campaign. It gets better, Mr Speaker, because, as was only reported in the last few days, the Greens' largest individual donor, this is as recent as a couple of days, was Gold Coast gambler and mathematician Duncan Turpie, who donated around $275,000. In early 2024, the Brisbane Times reported that Turpie had donated $472,088 to the party since 20... A beneficiary!
Order. No. Far too much noise. The Minister. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The members on my left will cease interjecting. No, the member for Griffith, like any other member, is entitled to raise a point of order. Everyone gets to be heard in silence while they raise, including the member for Griffith. He has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. On relevance, this is a serious question with went to gambling reform and actions on reform and cracking down on gambling advertising. The Minister is making light of a serious issue that impacts people's lives, and I think the people of Australia should expect a reasonable answer.
Order. No, everyone can just take the temperature down. The member for Griffith is entitled to raise his point of order. The Minister needs to make sure her answer is being directly relevant. She just can't talk about alternative policies, so I'm just going to ask her for the remaining 40 seconds to make sure if she's got further information to the House, or I don't know if she's got further quotes to read, but she's entitled to do that just as long as it's relevant to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Greens political party has had so many positions on this issue now, probably 3 positions in as many days. It's a party that has been vehemently opposed to the consultation process that this government has been doing. And I acknowledge, Mr Speaker, this is taking longer than we would have liked to get done. And the reason for that is the complexity. Whereas under the Leader of the Opposition, when he was a member of a cabinet for 9 years, initiated changes that resulted in a 50% increase in gambling advertising and an even bigger increase in regional areas. We will get this right because we know how important it is.
The call to the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government working to make families better off, including with the energy bills? What energy policies would leave Australians worse off?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The member for New England is warned. He will not interject during this answer, or he will leave the chamber. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The member for Pearce is a great member of a strong Western Australian Labor delegation, and I thank her for the question and her strong leadership in Western Australia. Now, Mr Speaker, of course, the Albanese government is delivering $300 in bill relief to every single Australian household, and by their reaction, the opposition shows what they think about that support for Australian households. They've shown that they've got, to be fair, different priorities, which I'll get to momentarily, Mr Speaker, but we believe direct support for Australian households is an appropriate priority for the Government of Australia. And of course we know that also there's a lot more to do. And that's why we know we need more electricity generation. And as I said to the House yesterday, it's a good thing that while in the decade of coalition government 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy left our grid, in the 3 years of the Albanese government 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy has entered the grid. That's the contrast of approach. And of course, in addition to that, we've added 15 gigawatts of renewables. That's in addition to the 4 gigawatts. Now, the interesting thing about the 15 gigawatts, Mr Speaker, of new renewable energy that's been added in the last 3 years, that's more than the opposition would add in nuclear power by 2050. So we've added more in 3 years than they would need the next 25 to deliver. And the other thing about those gigawatts that we've added, Mr Speaker, over the last 3 years is the vast bulk of that investment has come from the private sector. The vast bulk has come from private companies, facilitated by government policy but funded by the private sector. Because on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, we have the view, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and I, that if the private sector can do something, they should do it, not the taxpayer. That's what we think on this side of the House. On the other side of the House, they have a different view, because the opposition's own policy, and the member asked me what would make Australians worse off. Well, what would make Australians worse off is unnecessary taxpayer expenditure. And under the opposition's own policy, they would spend every dollar of their nuclear policy from the taxpayer. Now, when the taxpayer pays for something the private sector could pay for, that means the taxpayer is worse off, and it's got to be paid for by cuts to government expenditure. So we know they have $350 billion of cuts, and then they've got to pay for their nuclear policy, and then they've got to pay for the lunch policy, because we also believe that the private sector should pay for bosses' lunches. They're against support for households, but they're for taxpayer-funded barramundi for bosses, Mr Speaker. That's the priority made, the decisions made by the Leader of the Opposition. That's why he is such a risk to the taxpayer. That's why he's such a risk to Australia, because he doesn't think through his policies. He's always happy to throw taxpayer money at his mates. He's happy to throw taxpayer money at nuclear energy, taxpayer money at lunch for bosses, when we believe in the private sector. That's why the opposition is so risky for Australia.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Have a word to Michael. Have a word.
Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper, and I look forward to the major press conference I'm about to have with probably future budding journalists with Behind the News, and I invite Dennis and the team up there to come and see some young future journos in the courtyard. It'll be commencing soon. Hopefully it'll be broadcast live. It could be one of the best cracking ones I've ever done.
The call to the Leader of the House with papers.
Mr Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
I have received a letter from the honourable member for Page proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely, regional Australia has given up on the government because this government has given up on regional Australia. Before I call the member for Page, if members can leave their chamber as quickly and quietly as possible, it was my oversight. The member for Longman had indicated on indulgence he was seeking the call, and we will return to the MPI after the member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last evening, it was with deep sadness that I attended the vigil, along with 2,000 to 3,000 others, for Charlize Zamunda on her beloved Warren Beach on Bribie Island's surfside. Charlize was a teenager who tragically lost her life from a shark attack on Monday. Bribie is renowned as a tight-knit community, and the vigil last night was no greater example of this island's community's care for one another. The lives of Charlize's parents, Steve and Renee, and her sister, Stephanie, will never be the same again. But I'm convinced the outpouring of shared grief and love from the Bribie Island community, her St Columban School and Bribie Surf Lifesaving Club families has eased the unimaginable pain they would be enduring right now, just that little bit, by the love expressed on that beach last night, which was truly tangible. And I thank everyone who came to remember, grieve with and support this beautiful family. The entire Zamunda family are part of the fabric of the Bribie Island Surf Lifesaving Club. From nippers to serving on the board, patrolling or representing the club at carnivals and competitions, this family has for years selflessly given so much to the club, protecting the lives of those who visit this piece of paradise in Queensland. Yesterday, just one day after the tragic loss of his daughter, Charlize's father, Steve, was insisting that we all encourage people that they continue to come to Bribie, that it is a place that the Zamunda family have and always will love, despite the loss of their beautiful daughter. What remarkable strength. It is in these times we rightly try and make sense of why a life such as Charlize's from such a fine family could be taken. And sadly, this is a question we can never answer. But to Steve, Renee, Stephanie and the two grandmothers I met last night and all the other family members and friends, in the future there will be many milestones that will be missed in Stephanie's life. But I encourage you all at these times to focus on all the milestones you did celebrate. Milestones like birthdays, that first step, first word, first tooth, first day of school, the first Nippers Carnival, the lead role in last year's performance of High School Musical, and her high school formal, which was just last Friday night. My thoughts and prayers are with the entire family and community as they grieve and endure this most difficult of times. May you rest in peace, Charlize.